Happy holidays, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna, and this is episode number 236 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. In this episode, we're here to talk about another week that was and another week that will be around the 2024 NFL season. In this case, it's this past week that was week number 16, and the week that will be week number 17 in the NFL campaign, as the playoff picture continues to round out, continues to clear up, as we're getting down to the nitty gritty with the last 2 weeks coming up real soon in this regular season, as the playoffs are just around the corner, pal. So that's what we're here to talk about in this episode. And as I said at the very beginning of this episode, happy holidays to you all. Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, you name it. Whatever your holiday you're celebrating, maybe some other holiday that's out there. I hope you're having a good one during this festive time of the year, or maybe NFL-miss. NFL-miss. Yeah, we're making up a holiday here now, pal. It's Merry NFL-miss. Because, yeah, we got ourselves a Christmas slate this upcoming weekend. But we'll talk about it when we get there. But nonetheless, happy holidays to you all. Before we get started with this episode here in this one, make sure to follow Very Cold Lasagna wherever I'm at Very Cold Lasagna, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram. For all my audio listeners that are listening to me right now, make sure you rate and review the show however you want to, 1 to 5 stars. Make sure leave some feedback for me. And then for all my people watching me on YouTube, make sure you smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, leave a comment down below to share your own takes on the topic at hand. In this case, it's this past week, week number 16, and the week that will be week number 17. And then smash the notification bell so you'll be notified of each and every upload that goes up on the Very Cold Lasagna YouTube channel. And share this with your friends, share this with a neighbor, share this with a stranger, and share this with your colleagues, whether it's at work or at school, wherever you may be. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast titled Very Cold Lasagna. That being said, let's now get into the past week that was in the 2024 NFL season, week number 16. We were just 3 weeks away from the start of the NFL playoffs, and 3 weeks away from whoever is going on that January Cancun cruise and preparing for the long off season ahead. So before we talk about the games that happened this past week, we got to check in on the playoff picture before this past week. So we talked about in last week's episode who's already in the playoffs. We had the Bills, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Texans, and the Vikings. So they already punched their ticket to the big haloop-a-doo, that means the dance, in January. So who's ready for the January Cancun cruise? Who's ready to go on that long vacation? So there's a bunch of teams. There are the Giants, there's the Raiders, there's the Jaguars, there's the Patriots, there's the Jets, the Browns, the Titans, the Panthers, the Bears. So there are about 9 teams ready to go on that Cancun cruise in January. So this past week, in week number 16, there was several spots left to be fulfilled. And this week, when it comes to eligibility for that, well, there were a couple of games that had a number of things that had to fall into place, that had a number of possibilities at hand. So there was the Broncos game, and the Broncos and the Chargers game, the Steelers and Ravens game, the Eagles Commanders game, and then the Packers had something as well at stake. The Chiefs even had something at stake as well. And then there was, of course, the teams that were eligible to join the Cancun cruise. So those teams were the Saints, the Cowboys, the Cards, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Bengals, and the Colts. So there's a lot to sort through to clear up this muddy playoff picture that needs to be cleared up at the end of the week that was week number 16. But that's why we're here at Very Cold Lasagna, to clear it up in the most filthy casual way possible. So let's kick it off with the week that was week number 16, and starting things off was the Thursday night game that only happened on Amazon Prime Video for that Jeff Bezos money pal, as the Chargers and the Broncos faced off in this very key AFC West matchup to decide the wild card positioning. Actually, not the wild card positioning, to hopefully attain a wild card spot. As Justin Herbert, they were down 21 out of 10 at one point in the game, but Justin Herbert's touchdown passes to Darius Davis and Hassan Haskins late in the game, they helped the Chargers erase that deficit. And yeah, they got a key division win over the Denver Broncos, 34-27. That put them in pole positioning to clinch a playoff spot. Unfortunately, they didn't get this week, but they have a chance to do so next week. Denver had a chance to get that playoff spot this week, but they didn't get the job done. So this is the kind of rebound performance that the Chargers desperately needed. They got their butts whooped the previous week against the Bucs, and then the 2 weeks prior, they had a chance to kind of make a statement on the top team overall in the NFL in the Chiefs and get some payback on them from early in the season, but they kind of looked flat in that game as well. But in this one, the offense looked way more comfortable. Herbert wasn't forcing any passes that wasn't there. He was getting almost everybody involved. Everyone made the plays necessary to get this win. You know, sometimes less is more. I think Jim Harbaugh and these Chargers are starting to realize that. They're starting to realize that we need to keep things a little bit more simplified. So that possibly this is the thing that the Chargers needed to probably pull off a little bit of a run, but they're not quite there yet, but hopefully makes a little bit of noise in these last two games of the season. Meanwhile, you have the Denver Broncos. They still have a chance to clinch a playoff spot, but I mean, they could have done so here had they gotten a little too greedy with the passing attack. I get it. The running game wasn't strong in this one, but getting a little too money with the passing game, especially when you have a rookie quarterback like Bo Nix, who has been doing good in the last months, but you can't go too heavy on it so much that it's gonna slow down the game if it falls incomplete, and that's exactly what happened to the Denver Broncos. It got them off the field a little too much, that eventually it bit them in the butt. So hopefully they need to get the running game going again the next week. Otherwise, they're in a bit of trouble. So looking at the Saturday doubleheader, yes, we had a holiday special doubleheader this past week, the first of three, pal, which kicked off with the Chiefs taking on the Houston Texans, as Patrick Mahomes showed no signs of a bum ankle. Yeah, remember the previous week where he was limping off the field? But nonetheless, he showed no signs of that bum ankle. He had a 2-touchdown showing to beat the Texans 27-19, and the Chiefs one step closer to claiming the AFC's top seed. And there's a lot of us that whine and cry about it, saying how lucky they are, and maybe that's been the case all season. But I mean, they're here winning games on whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, however we want to put it. They're still they're still getting closer to making that history, and that's eating, sleeping, conquering, the repeating. So I don't know, man. You tell me. Is it luck, or are they just good? You tell me. But man, this Texans team, it's like, what's happened to them in the last month? Like, CJ Stroud's been like off his game, and then now they're suffering a rash of injuries. With first it was Stephon Diggs, then Nico Collins was out for a while, and now of course he's back now. But then they lose another receiver, Tank Dell. They lose Tank Dell again late in the season. This time it's even worse than last year. It's a torn ACL. It's like, ugh. That's another top weapon in the offense that's gone. So, yeah, at this rate, like, they're not catching the Steelers or the Ravens for the 3 seed. And they're looking like one and done in the playoffs, if you ask me. Considering that they don't have any other viable weapons on offense other than Nico Collins, and what's happening with Joe Mixon. So, yeah, you might as well consider resting players in the last game. Consider what's going to happen. You face the Ravens in the next one. So, yeah, it's not looking very good for the Texans right now. Speaking of the Ravens, they took on the Pittsburgh Steelers in the second game of the Saturday doubleheader as Marlon Humphrey, he notched a pick six in the fourth quarter that completely turned the game in favor of the Ravens to beat Pittsburgh and split the season series and, more importantly, not only seal up their playoff spot, but keep the AFC North race alive and well for them. And this was a performance that they absolutely needed, especially from the defensive side of things. They've been getting, I'd say, a little bit better. They've been more disciplined than when they started out in the regular season. They, especially in the secondary, and that was pretty evident against a struggling Steelers offense. The Ravens, they still got to take on C.J. Stroud in the Texans next week, but that they win that game before facing the skid marks in the regular season finale. That division is theirs. That division is basically theirs. Speaking of the Steelers, man, like they better hope that George Pickens will be ready for the Christmas game, because that offense with Russell Wilson looks like they're struggling. They can't generate like the same production without him. So they could still kind of move the ball, but it's just they can't do anything else. They can't reach 20 points. They're kind of underperforming right now. So they better hope he'll be good to go very soon, especially for that Christmas game against the Chiefs. So just saying. Going to the early morning portion of games, starting with the Sunday slate. The Sunday slate, going to the early morning portion first. The Atlanta Falcons took on the New York Giants in Michael Penix Jr.'s NFL debut, as 2 pick sixes by the Falcons defense and 2 rushing touchdowns by Bijan Robinson helped the Falcons secure a relatively easy win over the tanking Giants, 34-7. And like I said, this was Michael Penix Jr.'s NFL debut. Hey, I'd say he did all right. He did have an interception that necessarily was his fault. Kyle Pitts, he had the ball, but then it literally yeeted out of his hands, which led to the interception, like near the goal line. But other than that, the offense looked, I'd say, a lot more flowing, a lot more energetic than it did with Kirk Cousins for most of the year when he was under center. So, I mean, I didn't expect it to be like, oh, it's gonna be all sunshine and rainbows right away, but it looked a lot better. I take that back. I'd say it looked better. Not a lot better, but it was a good start for them. So he'll be facing a much tougher test under the bright lights of Sunday night next week. But I'd say he did very solid for this warm-up game. So at least if you're the Giants, though, you'll be happy with the news of what happened in one of the later games. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. So down in Carolina, the Panthers took on the Arizona Cardinals, and boy, did they take them to the limit. And they actually managed to win that game because they took the Cardinals to the overtime period, and Chuba Hubbard, he took a 20-yard scamper and won the game. They shook the Cardinals and took them out of playoff contention, beating them 36-30. And Bryce Young, once again, he had a bounce-back game, and he's once again making the Panthers reconsider their plans on moving on from him. And this is a pretty good performance for him against a playoff contending team that, well, is now no longer a playoff contending team. And Arizona, man, they came into this must-win game pretty unprepared on both sides of the ball, like it had been since their bye week. And look what happened to them. Earned them a one-way trip to Cancun. So, down in Chicago, the Lions scored 27 first-half points off the back of another signature performance from their red-hot offense and prevented the Bears from trying to make a comeback run beating them 34-17. The Lions didn't miss a beat with Jahmyr Gibbs taking on more of a lead role without David Montgomery. Gibbs pretty much sliced and diced this Bears defense in this heavy role, rushing for over 100 yards, notching a receiving touchdown. But I would still try to figure out a way to, get some more people involved to ease some pressure off him. They did try to get Craig Reynolds, I believe, some reps as quote unquote wide back. But they're gonna have to find some ways until David Montgomery returns. Maybe they could try to experiment in next week's game. Just food for thought. Now, that's good water. In Indianapolis, where at least if they don't make the playoffs, they got the Royal Rumble to prepare for. The Colts scored 38 unanswered points. That included 2 long touchdown runs from Jonathan Taylor, but they allowed 23 unanswered to the Titans, but they managed to hold on to win 38-30. And at least Jonathan Taylor, with those 2 touchdowns, with that kind of performance, he made up for his mistake in Denver with this big performance. And he held on to the football. So the Colts, they managed to find a little bit of a winning formula with Jonathan Taylor, being a little more involved, feeding him the rock to help along in Anthony Richardson's development. And like I said, the Colts weren't necessarily going to go to the playoffs anyway. This was more all about developing Anthony Richardson, getting him more reps. And aside from those 2 games where Joe Flacco started, but nonetheless, this was all about Anthony Richardson's development and, feeding the rock to Jonathan Taylor and then hopefully setting more things up for Anthony Richardson as a passer will go a long way. And if at least you're the Titans, and even though your comeback fell short, losing actually helped them. Meanwhile, on the Gang Green side of the Meadowlands, it was a low-scoring stalemate between the Rams and the Jets, which was broken in the 4th quarter when Matthew Stafford found Tyler Higbee for a red zone score that eventually beat the Jets 19-9. Now, this wasn't the Rams' best performance on offense once again, but again, they made the key plays that mattered, and their defense kept Aaron Rodgers in check for most of the day. And now going home to finish the regular season, they got their key players fully healthy, and their defense is playing, I'd say, pretty well, especially in the front 4. They're pretty much in the driver's seat to wrap up this NFC West as soon as next week. And then probably in one of the best games of the regular season. And we say that a lot about some of these games. The Washington Commanders took on the Philadelphia Eagles in a Week 11 rematch between these 2 teams, this time in the nation's capital. The Commanders overcame a 21-7 first quarter deficit and five turnovers as Jane Daniels led a game-winning drive with 10 seconds left to go, found Jamison Crowder in the red zone to shock the Eagles 36-33. And oh my goodness, man, Jane Daniels has been like a really clutch quarterback this year, and this is his first year, and he the win came with a caveat. But let's talk about it from the Commanders' perspective first. They had 5 turnovers, like 3 of them were very careless fumbles, but nonetheless, they still managed to overcome that. Joe Davis and Greg Olsen were shook just as everyone else was of how they overcame this insurmountable comeback, turned the ball over 5 times, and it was just an insane performance. This kind of comeback performance was I wouldn't say no other, but it was just one that can instill a lot of confidence in this organization going forward. After the years of shitty football that the Commanders have had, I think they finally got it. They finally got it right. They finally got something going with Jaden. Hopefully it keeps going forward. Meanwhile, for the Eagles, like I said, this loss did come with a caveat because they did lose Jalen Hurts to a concussion in the first quarter on a dirty hit. So I'm not necessarily sure how severe the concussion is. So that's something to keep an eye on. And there's already Eagles fans that are like, oh, the Commanders, like the Commanders only won because Jalen got hurt. It's like, I mean, the defense could have stopped them at least. The defense still could have stopped Jaden. That's all I'm saying. But they didn't. So, yeah, that was a very good game. That was like one of the big highlights of week number 16 and probably the whole year. Meanwhile, down in Cincinnati in the Battle of Ohio, Joe Burrow threw for 3 touchdowns, and that was enough to support the beatdown the Bengals defense gave on this lifeless skid marks team, aka the Browns, 24-6. The Bengals defense has been playing a lot better lately, but way too late. Like, where was this good defensive performance like all year? And it's against very poor teams too. Like, against a good team, it's like it's not there. So, like, I mean, it's encouraging. It's like hopefully encouraging going to the offseason, but right now it just comes way too late for the Cincinnati Bengals because they're out of playoff positioning. It's not happening, pal. Going to the late afternoon slate of games, the Minnesota Vikings took on the Seattle Seahawks in a very key NFC matchup. As Sam Darnold's go-ahead long bomb touchdown to Justin Jefferson was followed up minutes later by Theo Jackson of the Vikings, sealing up the game-winning interception on Geno Smith as the Vikings narrowly beat the Seahawks 27-24. These Minnesota Vikings finding ways to win and playing pretty well for themselves to keep this NFC North race and the race for the top seed very tight, which I think is more than likely going to come down to, depending on next week's results, going to be a winner-take-all finale in Detroit. Like I said, depending on next week's result, because, you know, the Packers might want to spoil things. Not because they're necessarily involved in it, but they might want to spoil things for the Minnesota Vikings. Meanwhile, for the Seahawks, you needed to have this game. But instead, Geno Smith, he had some bad turnovers, including the one at the very end. The rushing attack was And Kenneth Walker, I believe he also got hurt again after missing a couple games. But instead, they fell flat again. And their playoff hopes were all but dashed. They were all but dashed in this one. Now they better hope the Rams somehow falter to the already eliminated Arizona Cardinals next week so they can stay afloat for what could be a winner-take-all Week 18 matchup for the division. If not, then it's basically over for Seattle. Meanwhile, in Orchard Park, the Buffalo Bills took on the New England Patriots, who gave the Bills a scare. They went up 14-0 on the Bills, but the Bills slowly but surely scored 24 unanswered points on New England. But the Patriots managed to still give them a scare, but the Bills held them off to stay alive for the AFC's top seed, 24-21. This is probably the Bills' messiest performance of the year. But they keep saying it's by design because they already knew what happened the day before, and they're probably accepting that it's over for the number 1 seed, but not necessarily. I mean, depending on what happens on Christmas, I'm not, again, if it wasn't by design, then again, this is probably, not necessarily an encouraging performance for the Bills. And I'm not too concerned about it yet, but they really need to tighten up in these final 2 games. Again, it depends on if it was by design, though. Meanwhile, down in Vegas, the Raiders took on the Jacksonville Jaguars in a game somebody had to win, but by sacrificing their draft position as a result of it. And unfortunately for the Las Vegas Raiders, they decided to be the sacrificial lamb to that draft positioning. Amir Abdullah, that goal line touchdown in the 4th quarter, he decided to, you know what? Fuck the tank. Fuck tanking. I want us to win, pal. Just win, baby. And that gave the Raiders the lead as the Jaguars managed to outsuck the Raiders 19-14 in this one, pal. Oh boy, like I said, one of these teams had to outsuck the other on this one. It was a game where somebody had to win. These two teams were so bad. The Raiders were 2-12 heading to this one. The Jaguars were 3-11. The Jaguars didn't have their starting quarterback. And even if Trevor Lawrence were playing, it wouldn't have been any different. But the Raiders, unfortunately, they were the victims of not outsucking the Jaguars. And, well, they may have outsucked themselves out of one of the top two quarterbacks in the upcoming NFL draft. Now, there's some saying that the quarterback class is pretty weak in this one. But still, you don't want to miss out on a quarterback, though, still, because you never know what's going to be out there in the free agent market. And now, if you're still trying to get a quarterback in this draft, you're going to need one or more of those teams that are now in the top 2 or 3 to, quote unquote, lose by, quote unquote, winning their final 2 games to get back up there in the top 3. Down in South Beach, the Miami Dolphins took on the San Francisco 49ers as Brock Purdy tried to lead those 49ers on a 2-minute game-winning drive, but threw a bad beat interception to Kader Kahu of the Dolphins. Devon Achane followed that up with a touchdown run, a very long one, to seal up Miami's win 29-17. Brock Purdy. I mean, he's done decent this year, but this is probably his worst year. As starting quarterback, 2.5 out of 3 years as a starter quarterback. Yeah. It was a bad interception, though, but a necessary one in order to protect the choo-choo tank for a top 12 draft pick for the offensive lineman that Kyle Shanahan better consider drafting. I mean, sure, it does bad for Brock Purdy's contract extension, which shouldn't be a big fat one, but that actually is a necessary hit too. Meanwhile, for the Miami Dolphins, this probably won't increase its chances for a playoff spot because, well, Denver's right there, but they should at least be encouraged by the performances of Devon Achane, who had a big day gashing that 49ers run defense, and Jonnu Smith, who continues to be a good pass-catching tight end option for Tua Tagovailoa. So those are definitely keepers for the Dolphins next year. Then we have the Sunday Night Football game for week number 16 as the Dallas Cowboys took on the Tampa Bay Bucks. The Bucks cut a 26-14 lead down to 2, and they had a chance to go down the field and win the game at the very last moment. But Deron Bland miraculously stripped the ball away from Rachaad White to end those hopes for a Cowboys upset 26-24. And, well, even with this win, though, the Cowboys were already eliminated before this game, just like with a bunch of other teams. Who knows what will happen to Mike McCarthy? I do think that Jerry Jones will still probably not renew his contract because they will say Mike McCarthy got fired, but I do believe that Mike McCarthy's contract expires after the season. So, I mean, it's just like, oh, you're a free agent now, pal. We're not renewing your contract. But I mean, even then, these last 2 games will be one that will be testy for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Commanders, especially for the Eagles that may not have Jalen Hurts in it. Meanwhile, for the Bucks, just too many careless mistakes in this one. Ball secured especially was too loose all night for them. They had the ball punched out twice, like before that game-losing fumble. And yeah, it was going to come back to bite them. And it did at the very end. And Baker Mayfield's interception early in the fourth quarter was, again, caused by ball security or the lack thereof. So the Bucs could have won this game, but they couldn't. And now they got to take care of business against a rolling Panthers team that's been doing pretty solid for themselves. And they hope the Falcons drop dead to the Commanders to retake control of the South. So the Bucs no longer control their destiny. They really need to take care of business in this one because they couldn't get the job done against a Cowboys team that just doesn't want to give up on the season yet. Meanwhile, then we had a Monday Night Football game that, well, let's just say that was just as half-assed as a pre-taped Monday Night Raw was. Because the Packers scored on their three first possessions to easily shut out Spencer Rattler and, well, the dead remains of the Saints, 34-0, and punched their ticket to the January playoff dance. So, nothing to take away from this game because the Saints, there's basically nothing left of them. They're so undermanned that, like, there's really nothing. There's nothing left of them. And, like I said, the Packers easily scored on them on their first three possessions. They were up 21-0 before the first half ended. Like, way before the first half ended. It was like, and even if they didn't score, like more than that before the game ended, it's just like the Saints were just beating themselves, like with how little they have. So there was really nothing for Green Bay to gain from this game. There's just basically a warm-up game for the big game next week against the Vikings. So, yeah, that's pretty much how we ended week number 16. A half-assed game versus a pre-taped Monday Night Raw. So, yeah. Think about that. So, looking at your 3 stars of the week for week number 16, my 3 stars is quarterback Jaden Daniels. He was 24-39, 258 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. Yeah, he had 2 interceptions that were pretty bad, but managed to overcome that for a signature comeback win against the Philadelphia Eagles and get the Commanders one step closer to making the playoffs. Then you had Colts running back Jonathan Taylor, 29 carries, 218 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns in a bounce back performance against the Tennessee Titans. And then you had Vikings receiver Justin Jefferson, 10 catches, 144 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns, including the one that sealed the deal for the Vikings in that win in Seattle. So that was your week. That was week number 16. Let me know your thoughts on how your team did or didn't do this past week in the comments on YouTube or slide into the DMs on social media at Very Cold Lasagna, wherever I'm at. So, now that we're done with week number 16, let me drink this sip of water, and then we'll move on to week number 17 right now. So, week 17, here we are. Probably one of the most important weeks, I'd say the climactic week of the NFL season before we get to the final week of the NFL, the regular season, and then the playoffs. Playoffs? Yes, sir. Playoffs. So, this is the ultimate week, the second to last week of the regular season, and there's still some things to sort out. There's still some things to sort out in the playoff field. It is starting to get a lot more clear of who could get in, but you never know. Some things could get spoiled by certain teams. You never know. So, still a lot to sort out when it comes to seeding, division champions, and those that just want to mess around and find out. So, let's take a look at the playoff picture as it stands, going into this Christmas-filled week number 17. So, starting with who's already in the playoff dance. We had the Bills, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Texans, the Vikings, and the Ravens, as well as the Packers. So, we know who's already in and who's already ready to sail away on the January Cancun cruise. So, those teams joining the Giants, the Raiders, the Jaguars, the Patriots, the Jets, the Browns, the Panthers, and the Bears are the Saints, the Cowboys, the Cardinals, and my San Francisco 49ers. So, yeah, my Niners, for the first time in 4 years, are joining the January Cancun cruise. And deservedly so. So, my Niners. And they're definitely going to be involved in this week's possible clinchers on the NFC side of things. So let's talk about those possible clinching scenarios on the NFC side of things. Starting with the Detroit Lions. That loss by the Philadelphia Eagles opened things up a little bit for Detroit. The Lions, they can pretty much put a bow on the talk about the NFC's top seed if they not only beat the 49ers on Monday night, but they also need the Vikings to lose to the Packers the day before in that afternoon game. So they can wrap up the NFC North and claim the NFC's top seed and get some much needed rest for the playoffs with beating this hapless 49ers team and the Vikings to lose to the Packers the day before. So, yeah, an important week for the Lions in this one. The Philadelphia Eagles, they failed on their chance to clinch the NFC East, but they have another opportunity here with a win over the Cowboys, or they can also have the Commanders lose to the Falcons on Sunday night. For the Rams, they can win the NFC West as early as this week with a win over the Cardinals, and they're going to need the Seahawks to lose to the Bears a couple days earlier on a Thursday night. For the Falcons, they can win the NFC South with the win over the Commanders on Sunday night, and they'll need the Bucs to lose to the Panthers earlier that day. The Commanders, they get their playoff spot if they beat the Falcons or the Bucs lose to the Panthers earlier that day. So now moving on to the AFC side of things. It's a lot more simplistic because almost all the playoff spots are locked in. But for the Chiefs, they can claim the AFC's top seed simply by beating the Steelers on Christmas, or the Jets upset the Bills 4 days later. So whether or not they win or lose that game against the Steelers, they'll just need the Jets to upset the Buffalo Bills a couple days later on a Sunday. Meanwhile, for the Chargers and the Broncos, neither got into the playoffs as a result of that Thursday night game, but the Chargers made their path a little bit easier. And the Broncos, they still have a chance to get in too. All they have to do is beat their respective opponents on a Saturday. The Chargers got to beat the Patriots. The Broncos got to beat the Bengals, who are still fighting for their playoff lives on a Saturday. Speaking of those Bengals, they are one of the eligible teams to hop on the January Cancun cruise alongside the Dolphins, the Colts, the Seahawks, and the Bucs. Speaking of those other teams that I talked about with the Dolphins and the Colts, that Bengals game with the Broncos, it's going to have serious ramifications on those three teams, on those three teams, because if the Bengals lose, those other two teams are out. So, food for thought on their slim chances. So, now that we got all those scenarios out of the way, let's now talk about this Christmas-filled slate for the week that will be week number 17 in what on paper should look like an interesting and enticing money for your tummy week number 17. Starting with the Christmas Day doubleheader on Netflix. Why is it on Netflix? I don't know. Did they not learn? Did the NFL not learn from the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight, from all that buffering? Yeah, all that lag. They better have that fixed, even if it's on the dark side of the web, where I fully expect people to be using that over Netflix. And you better bet your ass this will be another test before Raw goes to Netflix in just about 2 weeks. So this will be an interesting test. And I know that Raw is not going to get this many amount of viewers as the NFL and that boxing fight from a month ago. But still, you don't want buffering. You do not want a lag on a major event like whether it's the NFL, WWE, or any sporting event. Like, you couldn't have put it on of all things, Amazon Prime Video, or hell, free TV. Like, Fox was right there, CBS was right there. man, the future is weird. The future is weird. Anyway, moving on from that side tangent, we kick off the Christmas Day festivities on Netflix as Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs begin their 2-game road trip to finish the season, visiting Russell Wilson and the Steelers in this oddball matchup. Excuse me. The magic number to lock up the top seed for the Chiefs is uno. Number 1. That's the number. That's the number for the Chiefs to get the number 1 seed. So even with how they're playing right now, being all these close games, aside from the skid marks game, they're looking for any way to win this one and get as much rest as possible before the playoffs. So that's all the Chiefs really need to do, is just win this game. Meanwhile, for Russell Wilson and the Steelers, they're desperate. They're desperate to snap this 2-game losing skid. They lost bad to the Eagles. They lost bad to the Ravens. They really need to snap this skid and hope that George Pickens is healthy enough to go for this game to get that offense to wake up. Because they let this AFC North race open right back up after losing to the Ravens. So they got to have this game. Speaking of the Ravens, they're at 10-5, facing the 9-6 Houston Texans in the second of 2 Christmas Day games that we can't see. John Cena style. And this one's an AFC divisional playoff rematch from back in January from last year between Lamar Jackson and CJ Stroud, as the Ravens look to inch much closer to the AFC North division title, while the Texans, they're just trying to look for any positive momentum and avoid any other significant injuries, because they lost Tank Dell already to a torn ACL. They lost Stephon Diggs earlier in the season. So they're trying to come away from this game relatively unscathed, going to their first playoff game. So looking at the Thursday Night Football game, the last one of the year, as the Seahawks at 8-7 take on the 4-11 Chicago Bears. The Seahawks really need to turn things around, man, and play a lot cleaner football than they did against the Vikings if they want to have any hope left to claim the NFC West. But that starts with a cold weather game. Yeah, bear weather to face as they face Caleb Williams and the Bears. If Caleb and the Bears can put up a fight. Then we have the second of 3 Saturday games, slate of games, and this one is a Saturday triple header only on the NFL Network, pal. And oh boy, this slate, oof, it'll question your sanity. But anyway, at least it involves 3 playoff contending teams. And that the first of 3 include the LA Chargers at 9-6 take on the 3-12 New England Patriots. Justin Herbert and the Chargers, they're looking to follow up that comeback performance against Denver and lock up one of the last 2 AFC wildcard spots, visiting Drake May and the Patriots in the first of 3 games of Saturday. But even if they're rebuilding, don't discount Drake May and the Patriots, because last week they gave Josh Allen and the Bills a bit of a scare. So the Chargers should not discount that. Meanwhile, in the second game, Denver at 9-6 visits the 7-8 Cincinnati Bengals. But the Denver Broncos gave away last week's game in LA. So now they're heading out northeast in Ohio to hopefully lock up the other last playoff spot in the AFC against a team desperately trying to get that same spot in Joe Burrow and the Bengals. So this is a very important game, not just for the Bengals, but also for the Colts and for the Dolphins. So 3 teams are hinging. Actually, 2 other teams are hinging on the Bengals to pretty much win this game to keep its hopes alive. Because if the Broncos win, it's over for all 3 of them. It's it's dead. Meanwhile, in the nightcapper, the LA Rams at 8-6 host the 7-8 already eliminated Arizona Cardinals. As Matthew Stafford's in the Rams, they're a bit ice cold on offense right now, but they're still riding high, looking to lock up the NFC West in their grasp. Depending on what happens in the Thursday game with Seattle, they could wrap it up here. But if not, if the Seahawks win, well, the Rams nonetheless will still have an inch closer to the division title, and they'll look to keep it that way when Kyler Murray and the Cardinals come to town. Looking at the Sunday slate of games, starting with the early morning portion, the Indianapolis Colts at 7-8 visit the 2-13 New York Giants. Now, the Colts won't know what will happen to their very slim playoff hopes until the day before, but they'll hope to get Anthony Richardson a little bit more involved as a passer when they face this Giants team that's, well, now in firm pole position for the top overall pick in next year's draft, thanks to the Raiders not outsucking the Jaguars. Meanwhile, down in Orchard Park, on the western side of New York, Josh Allen and the 12-13 Buffalo Bills, they faced a scare last week against the Patriots, and, well, they could possibly be facing another one if they're not careful when Aaron Rodgers and the 4-11 New York Jets come to town for this Week 6 rematch. Now, a lot of what Josh Allen and the Bills could do in this matchup will depend on the results of the Chiefs and the Steelers game. If the Chiefs win that game and claim the top seed in the AFC, you might not see a lot of Josh Allen and the Bills unleashing on the Jets like they did against Drake May and the Patriots. So that's something to keep an eye on. Like, what Josh Allen and the Bills do in this game could be a deciding factor. It could be dependent on what happens in the game that kicks off week number 17. That being, of course, involving the Chiefs. So something to keep an eye on. Meanwhile, down in the land of all elites, a rematch of week 14 is a game of sacrificial draft positioning, as the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars, both teams at 3-12, well, just like with Tony Khan, one of these teams have to outsuck the other. In this game, someone has to give up their draft positioning, pal. One of them will go up, the other one will go down. That's the life of AEW. Anyway, meanwhile, in a game that got moved up from its late afternoon slot, the Eagles at 12-3 look to wrap up the NFC East after failing to do so last week in Washington. But who knows if they'll have their starting quarterback, Jalen Hurts, if he doesn't clear concussion protocol, as they face the 7-8 Dallas Cowboys in a rematch of week number 10. And the Cowboys, they've been playing a little bit harder. And I don't mean that kind of hard, if you know what I mean. I'm just kidding. They've been playing with a lot more conviction lately, especially this past week in that upset to the Bucs. So the Eagles have to be careful here not to run into this spoiler team that has been the Cowboys. So they can't play with fire in this one. Meanwhile, in another game, a sacrificial positioning, the Las Vegas Raiders at 3-12 take on the 5-10 New Orleans Saints. We'll find out if this Raiders team will find another way to outsuck the Saints, who just got shut out by the Packers. And we'll find out if the Raiders will find a way to lower their draft odds even further of getting another a potential franchise changing quarterback that they desperately need. We'll find out soon enough in the Big Hard on Sunday. Meanwhile, in this rematch from earlier in the year, after losing an important game last week, Baker Mayfield and the 8-7 Tampa Bay Bucks, they've lost their grip on the NFC South back to the Atlanta Falcons. And now they face elimination in this must-win game against the 4-11 Carolina Panthers. They got to win this one against Bryce Young and them, who've been playing much better, much decent football in the last month. So Baker Mayfield and the Bucs cannot discount this team anymore. They can't discount Bryce Young and the Panthers because they've been playing better football in the last month. Going into the late afternoon slate of games, a game that got rightfully removed from Sunday Night Football, as the Miami Dolphins at 7-8 take on the 3-12 Cleveland Browns. Just like with the Colts, the Dolphins won't know whether their very slim playoff hopes have been officially evaporated the day before with that Broncos-Bengals game. But they'll have to play with their present and future in mind when they face this skid marks team that could be in pole position for a top 2 draft pick. Maybe they'll be they could be in a good market for QB, depending on what happens with those other bottom tier teams. Meanwhile, in a game that got moved to this late afternoon window, it's an NFC North rematch from week number 4 as the Green Bay Packers at 11-4 take on the 13-2 Minnesota Vikings, who look to reach much closer to the Detroit Lions for the NFC's top overall seed. But Jordan Love and the Packers look to play spoiler to those hopes. Then we have the Sunday Night Football game for week number 17 as the Atlanta Falcons at 8-7 take on the Washington Commanders at 10-5. It's a game that got flexed, and it's one that has serious implications for both of these teams when it comes to the playoffs. Michael Penix Jr., his second start is an important one. Under the bright lights of Sunday night, his team is on the verge of potentially clinching the NFC South, depending on what happens with Baker Mayfield and the Bucs early in the day with Carolina. His team could potentially wrap up the division, and he's got to do it against his fellow draft mate, picked six picks before him in Jane Daniels, who could wrap up the last NFC playoff spot. So this is an important game for both of these teams, and an important one for their playoff lives. So this is a must-win game for both of these teams. Then we have the Monday Night Football game to wrap up week number 17. Why the hell did the NFL keep this game on Monday Night Football? Like, there was no other game. Like, seriously, no other game. Like, they could have chosen to remove this one from here. Like, why? Why does the NFL insist on making us suffer? Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, there seriously was nothing else here. Like, they want the NFL. They want us NFL fans. They want everyone around the world competing against the last Raw before Netflix to witness a massacre, to witness a murder. I guess so. I guess that's certainly the case. Because it's an NFC title rematch between the 13-2 Jared Goff and the Lions taking on the 6-9, not 69, but it certainly feels that way, San Francisco 49ers. It's a complete shell of what happened last year. But anyway, Jared Goff and the Lions looked to inch even closer to the NFC's top seed. And like I said, what's going to be more than likely going to be a Monday Night Murder against whatever's left of this 49ers team. They already shut down a few key players for the rest of the year. So it's just like, yeah. Why did the NFL keep this as the Monday night game? Like, looking at this list, you couldn't have picked anything else. There's nothing else to pick from. Like, seriously? Like, they couldn't have moved the Cardinals and Rams game to Monday night? Seriously? Like, what is wrong? What is wrong with the NFL? They want the world to witness a Monday night massacre. Like, for real. But then again, last time I said that, it was like 3 years ago. It was like the complete opposite. It was like the complete opposite of that. But I'm pressing the damn guarantee button. That's gonna happen this time around. But anyway, that is the week that will be week number 17. Still plenty to figure out with this playoff picture, but it's coming a lot more clear of who is going to be in the January dance and who is going to be on the January Cancun cruise for however long that's going to be. So let me know who you're going with this week in the comments below. Let me know your predictions, your picks, and who's going to be joining that January Cancun cruise. Let me also know your very early playoff predictions. I know there's still a lot to be decided with the playoff picture, but hey, why not start now? Let me know those in the comments below as well on YouTube, and then you, of course, send me a message at Very Cold Lasagna on my socials. So yeah, let's have a conversation about it, and then let me know your reactions to week number 16 as well. Yeah, we're getting closer to the end of the regular season, and then the real fun begins with the playoffs. And, well, the playoffs brings us an interesting time, pal. Can't really dissect that quite yet, but it should be interesting, to say the least. It brings us some interesting stuff every year. So we'll leave it at that. But until then, until we discuss another week that was and another week that will be for the last 2 weeks, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. Thank you for tuning into this episode number 236 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And once again, make sure to follow me on social media at Very Cold Lasagna. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure to listen to this wherever you get your podcast. And again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate during this time of the year. And enjoy all the holiday sports that are going on right now. If for all you sports fanatics out there, or maybe not sports fanatics out there, enjoy the Christmas movies or holiday movies that you're doing, or whatever tradition that you partake in during this time of the year. Enjoy it. But until the next episode, happy holidays to you all, and peace out.